What is your best D&D homebrew rule?
At my table in combat, when a confirmed crit happens, whether it's a success or a failure, two rules kick in very quickly. The first is a crit table, and the second is a narrative rule. Here's my crit success table. As you can see, it works its way up from being, pretty minor stuff like, okay, you do the normal sort of hit that you're expecting with, on the body with the base multiplier of the weapon, and then it moves up. Note also that that's like a 5% chance of that happening, and then when you get down to this really high level stuff, it starts to decrease to like a 2%, and here at death, 1% chance. So, it gets worse and worse the higher that you roll for the person that you hit with the critical hit. The critical failure table is pretty similar, follows basically the same rules, except that now you have the chance to damage yourself or an ally, and some rules on how to decide which ally gets hit if that's who you choose. Or roll, really. You don't choose. But note, once again, the 100% chance, or the 1% chance, if you roll the highest possible check on the percentage die, is just that you die for how bad the roll was. Now, obviously, that's a high risk, but it very rarely happens. In fact, I've never actually rolled it in my own practice because the situation here, it's a 1% chance of happening on a critical failure. And, there's how often a critical failure happens and how often you get 100 on the percentage die. I personally have not had the experience of it, but, it is a possibility, and people are aware of that up front. They know that they're trading off the 1% chance of an insta-kill for the 1% chance of an instant death. And, generally they're okay with that. But what happens immediately afterwards is that I then tell them, okay, here's rules-wise what happened. You hit them on the arm for this much damage, or you hit them on the armor and it did this much damage, and now they don't have the use of that arm. Now, if it's a critical hit, they get to narrate how that happens. Now, there are some things that have already been decided, like they already said, I'm hitting them with my sword, or I'm shooting them with my bow, or whatever. And so there's some information that's already available. But basically what happens at this point is I tell them, you get to take the floor. It is your turn to narrate. And so they can tell a story of how they got that hit and did that damage, or crippled that limb, or cut that dude's head off, or whatever. And they get to explain that in as outlandish and epic and amazing way as they want. And it can break any rules it needs to. It's just, this is what happens. And it's canon. If they say, and I've had this happen, they say they jumped over their own ally and ran across the wall and dove down and drove the sword straight down into the person's spine, and then they end their turn at that spot. That's what happened. I moved their mini. They are now there. That is what happened for that turn. And because that is the reward for that, you get to take center stage and make the story up to fit the way that you envision this happening. And everyone else at the table tends to enjoy this. Like they get excited to hear the story of what happened and how you did that. But the trade-off is that if it was a critical failure, I get to do that. So the GM, I sit down and I say, okay, here's how that went for you. And I get to narrate any story that I want and make that be canon. And people really enjoy it. They get that chance to really get creative and make this be how they want it to be, and kind of envision what their character would do and how their character would make this great epic thing. And I've had players who sit there and kind of map out in their heads, next time I get a crit, I want it to be like this. I want to do this. I have this idea. And so they envision how their characters are fighting. And so they start thinking through how their characters are fighting and what types of things they're doing and what types of situations they want to set up for. And because they're doing that, they, in general, even though it's not necessarily the objective of the rule, what they end up doing is they actually end up doing combat better. And they end up thinking through it more and being more invested because they're waiting for that, and they're waiting to hear a story, and they're waiting to tell a story. And they love that. Like, that adds energy and adds excitement to the scene and to the fight in general, even if no crit actually happens. Now, what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've uploaded those crit tables that I showed you, the PDF that I used to print off. And if you're interested in using that or using it as a springboard to kind of build your own off of, I did make the PDF available on the Rabbit Haberdashery website. Follow the link there. Right there on the homepage, there'll be a button that says Crit Tables. Just click that, and that'll be the PDF. And if you like, you can explore some other gaming stuff and stories and books and stuff that we have there as well.